Good evening, class and Professor Romo. My name is Jessica Studer, and this is my capstone project for COM 599. I have chosen to do my research case study, and the subject I used was the influence of communication on leadership, organizational culture, and its impact on employee engagement. I chose to do the research case study because I have been studying communication, leadership, and organizational culture independently over the last few years in my undergrad work as well as my graduate work. And after doing the communications, strategic communications particularly, I really found the communication theory courses really interesting, especially as it related to this topic. But as I moved through strategic communication, I started to really see some of the impact of leadership, actually, especially after our leadership course for our graduate program here. So I wanted to look at these three components that seem to often be discussed independently and bring them together to demonstrate how they must work together in order to be effective. Sometimes they are work together, just not consciously. So that's what the subject is. So I'll move right along. Excuse me. My purpose statement. The purpose of this paper is to examine the influence of strategic internal communications on organizational culture, leadership, and its impact on employee engagement. Communication is understood to be important to an organization. However, too many companies include communication as part of a marketing or public relations strategy, external, rather than an internal component that helps drive organizational objectives. Um, that is true. They do need to do that. There is necessary, but they don't only see it as the marketing or public relations side. They don't really fully understand the communications part internally. Often due to the unquantifiable nature of the impact of organizational culture, organizations tend to ignore this important component of healthy business. By examining these interrelated concepts, a correlation between these components that can have deeper sociological and physical implications can be examined. My research questions are: how does a spiral of silence impact organizational culture? And can organizational culture, strong leadership, and communication thrive independently within an organization? Analysis of topic. The artifact I examined was the CBS television show Undercover Boss. The episode followed Warren Boone, Chief People Officer at Coco's Bakery Restaurant. As the Chief People Officer, excuse me, Warren was responsible for hiring, firing, and training. He goes undercover sorry, and attempts various positions: server, shift lead, baker, general manager in training. In each role, he discovers barriers that keep his team from performing their best. This episode takes place with the reopening of business post-pandemic. Due to the economic shift, he is forced to lay off 50% of the workforce, and his time on the show is an opportunity to see the impact that his decisions make on frontline workers. Although the show is primarily made for entertainment purposes, the premise does allow for leaders to see their organization from the perspective of their employees. Often leaders make decisions based on what is best for the business. From a metrics and financial perspective, while ignoring the human component of their businesses, Warren was able to see how each of these individuals, through their commitment to the company, went above and beyond to mitigate shortcomings issues that arose due to leadership making decisions based on cost alone. I will interject right here that one of the key tenets of employee engagement is that it has to be intrinsic. And these particular employees were selected because they went above and beyond. To be honest, I don't know how they select for the show, but they're obviously standouts. They're hard workers. They have a backstory. They make good TV, quite honestly, but as well as the fact that they're all very committed to the organization. And that's intrinsic. They have that within them. It's not really anything the organization is doing. And I'll touch on that a little more in a bit. From a communication perspective, it was evident that the organization had a failure to communicate. Ideas and concerns from the bottom were being ignored by corporate leadership. The issues that Warren uncovered in each job he went undercover for helped him see the large gaps in the process that often organizational leaders do not have the opportunity to see due to the nature of their roles. Excuse me. In his undercover experience, he uncovered the four following issues: equipment that made the job of server more difficult and impacted the customer experience, lack of quality product to make pies, which was a large percentage of the revenue, the lack of social media marketing plan, and finally, adequate staffing. Finding work around solutions should not be the rule. They should be the exception to an organization that understands its business. Warren was knowledgeable regarding the business and saw the challenges his employees faced as barriers to top performance. Communication is at the forefront of every interaction in not only this episode, but in issues in various organizations. Some of the more subtle, unintentional communication issues that become apparent in the episode are the internal communications, as well as the lack of strategic communication plan that, had it been implemented sooner, could have helped the organization sooner. I'll add to that any organization the size of Coco's that in 2022 does not have a type of strategic social media plan, or excuse me, strategic communication plan that applies to social media, is definitely not well versed in what's going on with the business. Um, they had to sell to another company, which was revealed during the episode. They had to cut their staff. It was post-pandemic, so there's a lot of things going on. But again, this really directly correlates with the lack of communication from the top to the bottom. Uh, Warren admits that many of the decisions they made were fiscal. And while he did get to see and appreciate the opportunity to see how this impacted his frontline workers, that's just one part of it. It's also impacting the bottom line. And they are lucky that they have these loyal workers who are there for their own personal reasons, not because the organization is themselves doing something to drive that, because there's a huge gap, and it's evident in watching the episode. The evaluation of the topic. How does the spiral of silence impact organizational culture? Spiral of silence is the term meant to refer to the tendency of people to remain silent when they feel their views are in opposition to the majority view on a subject. Fear of reprisal, or more extreme isolation, in the sense that voicing said opinion might lead to a negative consequence beyond the mere isolation, loss of job status, etc. Organizations that fail to examine why people stay and why people leave cannot truly understand their business. Profitability cannot be the only measure of organizational viability and health. With this knowledge, the statistics show that the people don't leave bad jobs, rather they leave bad managers. With this knowledge, why do bad leaders stay in power for so long? Does a poor organizational culture keep bad leadership in place because of the spiral of silence? Oops, sorry. While the spiral of silence itself cannot be the sole cause of poor organizational culture, excuse me, it is a symptom. The problem with the spiral of silence and why our organizations fail to see it is because of the very reason implied in the name. The logic of the spiral of silence concept is this: people fear social isolation. People constantly observe the climate of opinion to determine which opinions and what behaviors are suitable for public display. People refrain from publicly expressing their opinions if they feel that their opinion is losing ground. For while more and more followers of the losing opinion fall silent, their cause becomes less and less visible in public. Organizations contribute to this invisible yet detrimental behavior verbally and non-verbally. This is directly where the culture sets a standard for what is acceptable and not acceptable. Individuals learn by observing what behaviors are acceptable within the organization, which behaviors are rewarded and which are punished. This causes individuals to remain silent as a form of self-preservation. Unfortunately, organizations that promote this type of behavior struggle to even recognize its presence. The application of the social cultural theory of communication is actively at work in this type of environment that allows for the spiral of silence to persevere. The other question I had was, excuse me, can organizational culture, strong leadership, and communication thrive independently within an organization? The short answer is no. However, without a consensus as to the meaning of what is referred to when these terms are used, organizations fail to address them. Often leaders confuse communications and communication, assuming that the ability to simply use various communication modalities to disseminate information to employees is communication. And while that is not incorrect, it doesn't address the type of non-business communication that occurs every day within organizations. The type of communication that shapes the organizational culture, the verbal, nonverbal. When it comes to organizational culture, not enough leaders understand their existing culture and their role in shaping it. A strong organizational culture requires effort to drive it. The findings. So the research confirmed that there is limited understanding by leaders as to the importance of component of culture, communication, and leadership. In order for leaders to take proactive approach to organizational culture, they must understand the importance of these interdependent factors. One of the other things I will say that I found from the Undercover Boss episode was, as I mentioned before, these particular employees were the standouts. They're the ones who have intrinsic reasons for doing what they do, but we don't see what is happening to the others and whether they're engaged or not. Those kind of barriers might have not deterred the hard workers who felt loyalty to the company as well as had their intrinsic need to perform. However, those barriers were very valid barriers that prohibited people from doing their jobs to the best of their abilities, which leads to frustration. It leads to disengagement when they don't feel like they're being heard or they're even cared for as employees. So, from that perspective, while we don't have specifics on the television show because they don't cover those particular people or the individuals, only the four that they highlight for the episode, the research does support that when those things are occurring, employees become disengaged. The research suggests that subjects of leadership itself requires more study. Leadership is an abstract concept that is often misunderstood, and although it is not independent of communication and culture, it seems to be the driver of both. Culture and culture, good or bad, cannot exist without because of what leadership allows, and for the purpose of the examination, the definition of leadership must be expanded to include those that have influence. A more well-rounded perspective approach to leadership and understanding of what makes great leaders is necessary. That includes drivers of culture and communication. The findings also demonstrate the immense impact of psychosocial components in communication that contribute to its effectiveness. Oops, excuse me guys, let me get to the next screen. Conclusion and for future research. Although there is a great deal of research on leadership, communications, and organizational culture, there are tremendous gaps in understanding how these are interconnected as well as how to truly understand each independently. History is filled with great leaders who were made great by their accomplishments, and often the human impact was neglected in the stories of their success. However, leadership must take on new form beyond conquest and growth for the sake of growth, and the future will require a deeper understanding of a fully integrated approach to leadership. Um, with that said, I often say that leadership is a misunderstood concept. There's many articles about how to be a good leader, more like a set of bullet points as opposed to a strategic approach. And the reason I say there needs to be a strategic communication approach to this entire process is because you're integrating several components and there needs to be deeper understanding of what those look like. And I can understand why they've fallen through the wayside over the years because they are unquantifiable, not completely, but often when the results, for example, if an organization conducts surveys of their employees, exit surveys, often those results are dismissed because the employee is leaving as disgruntled. So personal beliefs are attached to those results, not giving leaders a good picture, and especially in a toxic organizational culture. We don't have leaders who actually, not we, but leaders fail to see the big picture and see how they approach that. So it is important for leaders to be willing to look at themselves. So I think, like I mentioned before, that I think moving forward in the future, the research will definitely point towards leaders who have all those qualities of self-reflection, empathy, great communication skills, but it'll need to be, and we do see that in famous leaders throughout history. Those are all skills that they have, but when the studies of, unless someone goes deep diving into what they did, we don't actually look at how that impacted their followers. It's more of how it impacted their accomplishments, which leaves the whole part of what makes them good leaders out of that equation. So this was my project for my strategic communication program for leadership communication and organizational culture. And these are my references. I'm really enjoyed doing this project. It was great to do further research, and I definitely look forward to doing more research on the subject on each of these independently, as well as seeing them together in even more detail. So thank you.